She walked into the boutique to buy a gift for her husband, only to be told, "That dress is out of your budget." What they didn't know, her husband owned the entire company, and was standing right beside her. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. The bell above the glass door gave a soft chime as Elena stepped into Russell Boutique. The store was nestled between two upscale galleries in downtown Charleston, the kind of place that didn't advertise with big signs but rather relied on polished wood, marble floors, and the kind of silence that made every footstep sound like it had a price tag. Elena stood at the entrance for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the light. She was in her early 50s, wearing a soft beige cardigan, navy slacks, and well-worn loafers. Her hair was tied in a low bun, and she carried a purse that had seen years of errands, groceries, and doctor's appointments. Beside her, Richard gently held the door before letting it fall closed behind them. He wore a gray windbreaker, jeans, and shoes that had walked more hospital hallways than red carpets. He looked like someone's quiet uncle, or maybe, as the staff assumed, a driver. No one greeted them. Across the showroom, a group of 3 women laughed over a rack of silk blouses. A sales associate in heels that clicked like typewriters practically floated toward them, her smile ready and perfect. A second later, Elena realized the smile wasn't for her, it was for the woman with the Chanel brooch. Elena moved slowly between the racks, touching fabric now and then, pausing longer at a soft gray dress that caught her eye. It had a subtle shimmer under the lighting, elegant without screaming for attention. Something about it felt right, like something she could imagine giving Richard on his birthday. Though he'd insist she was being too generous again. As she lifted the hanger to see the size, she heard a low voice behind her. 2 sales associates were speaking near the register. One said, without much effort to lower her voice, "They're probably just here to browse. Happens all the time." The other gave a little laugh, and though Elena didn't look up, she felt the comment hit her like a gust of wind on bare skin. She didn't flinch, didn't say anything, just returned the dress to the rack with quiet fingers. Richard stood nearby, hands behind his back, studying a tie display. He glanced her way, caught the tension in her mouth. He didn't speak, but his eyes told her he'd heard it too. Elena moved to the next section. A different associate, taller, younger, maybe new, approached with a clipboard. She looked Elena over quickly, her expression shifting from polite to professional distance. "Are you looking for something specific today?" the associate asked, her tone more functional than friendly. Elena nodded. "I'm looking for a gift. My husband's birthday is coming up." The woman blinked, confused, then smiled faintly. "This section is mostly for women's evening wear," she said. "Yes," Elena replied. "I saw a dress earlier. The gray silk one over there. I thought it might be nice for the occasion." There was a pause. The associate looked Elena up and down. "That's part of our premium collection. It's not typically in the usual price range." The way she said it, firm but with a hint of sympathy, as if delivering news about a surgery not covered by insurance, settled in Elena's chest like a stone. She didn't argue. She gave a soft smile and thanked her. Richard walked over slowly, putting one hand gently on her back. They stood there a moment, both quiet, not because they had nothing to say, but because the weight of the room, the glances, the whispers, the absence of kindness, said too much. The laughter from the group across the room continued, louder now, like background music in a story that wasn't theirs. Elena looked back at the dress once more. It still shimmered under the light, still beautiful, but somehow, in that moment, it felt farther away than before. She turned to Richard. "Maybe we should go," she said softly. Richard gave a nod, but before they could leave, a third associate passed by, casting a quick glance at him. "Sir," she said curtly, "please don't touch the display items." Richard blinked. He hadn't touched anything, but he didn't argue. He looked at Elena again, this time with something different behind his eyes. Not just sadness, something sharper, something that had been quiet for a long time, beginning to stir. They walked toward the exit in silence, the polished floor reflecting every step they took. Elena's fingers brushed against the strap of her purse, gripping it tighter than usual. Outside, the afternoon sun was warm against her face, but in her chest, there was a chill she couldn't quite shake. Elena stood quietly near a glass display of scarves, her hands folded gently in front of her, waiting for someone, anyone, to acknowledge her presence. The gray silk dress she'd admired earlier still lingered in her mind. But something about the way she'd been treated gnawed at her, made her question whether she even belonged there in the first place. She took a breath, steadied her voice, and approached a young associate who was folding belts at a nearby table. Her smile was polite, cautious. "Would it be possible to take a look at some of your more exclusive pieces?" Elena asked, gesturing slightly toward the elegant staircase at the back of the store. The associate didn't look up at first, continuing to fold as if she hadn't heard. When she finally lifted her eyes, they scanned Elena's cardigan, her shoes, her modest purse. "Our upper-level collection is reserved for returning clients or those with an appointment," she replied flatly. Before Elena could respond, the entrance chimed again. A well-dressed couple swept into the store, their coats barely dusting the floor as they walked. The woman's heels echoed confidently, and the man had a pocket square so crisp it could slice paper. A different associate rushed forward with the kind of energy that hadn't been present all morning. "Mr. and Mrs. Corwin," she beamed. "We've been expecting you. Champagne while you browse?" The pair was whisked up the staircase with warm greetings and gentle hands, as if the entire place had been designed around their arrival. Elena watched them disappear to the second floor, her throat dry, fingers curling slightly at her side. Still, she tried again. Another associate was organizing ties along the wall. Elena approached with gentle resolve. "I'm looking for a gift," she began. "Something special for my husband's birthday." The associate turned, looked her over, and smiled, tightly. Her words were coated in something that felt almost amused. "Well," she said, "we do have a few options for mature gentlemen, if you're keeping it simple." Elena blinked, unsure how to respond. The way the woman emphasized the word mature, the pause she left afterward, it felt less like a suggestion and more like a judgment. Across the room, Richard had wandered into a section of casual wear, quietly observing a row of button-downs. His posture was relaxed, hands behind his back, but his eyes were attentive. He took a slow look around the store, then tapped something into his phone with one hand. A younger associate, who hadn't noticed him before, hurried over. "Sir, we kindly ask that you refrain from touching display items unless you're purchasing," she said, her voice sharp. Richard turned to her, calm and composed. "I wasn't," he replied softly, "just reading the tags." But the associate was already moving on, not offering even a nod of acknowledgement. Elena moved toward the exit, her purse strap slipping slightly off her shoulder. She didn't say anything. There was a hollow quiet to her steps now, the same kind that settles in a room after disappointment walks in and sits down. Before she could reach the door, a tall figure emerged from the back office, a young manager, barely 30, with slicked hair and a face too stern for his age. He blocked her path with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Ma'am," he said, "if you're not planning to make a purchase today, we ask that you let our team focus on clients who are." It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, but it stung more than yelling ever could. Richard stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice or break stride. He simply pulled his phone from his pocket, tapped once, and held it to his ear. "This is Richard Langston," he said, his tone even, almost casual. "Initiate internal service audit protocol. Resell location. Store code 03. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. The manager's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no sound came out. The young associate who had spoken to Richard backed up a step. Another staff member dropped a hanger. Elena looked at Richard, eyes narrowing slightly. She wasn't sure what had just happened, but she knew something had shifted. He turned toward her and smiled, gentle as ever. "Would you like to keep looking?" he asked. Elena didn't answer right away. Outside, the city kept moving, horns, footsteps, laughter somewhere in the distance. Inside Russell, though, time had paused, and for the first time that day, it paused for her. The hallway leading to the VIP lounge was quieter than the rest of the store. almost unnaturally so. Elena followed a few steps behind the manager who had, just moments ago, spoken to her like she was in the wrong building. Now he was all apologies and forced charm, saying things like, small misunderstanding, and exceptional service. She didn't buy it. Inside the lounge, the lighting was warmer, the chairs were cushioned deeper, and a glass table in the middle held a tray of chilled water and imported chocolates. A soft instrumental version of an old Sinatra tune played overhead. On any other day, she might have enjoyed it, but today, everything felt off, like a pretty room hiding a leaking pipe. She sat carefully on the edge of one armchair and glanced at Richard, who remained standing, hands loosely in his pockets. She leaned toward him slightly. "Who did you call earlier?" she asked, keeping her voice low. He gave her that same calm smile she'd seen many times over their 30 years together. The kind he used when he didn't want to say more than he had to. "Just someone at the main office," he replied, and left it there, before she could press him. The door opened and two staff members entered with nervous energy. One carried a fresh platter of fruit and cheese. The other adjusted the lighting without being asked. Elena noticed how neither of them looked directly at Richard for more than a second. Their movements were rehearsed but tense, as if they were afraid to misstep. Moments later, another man walked in, older, polished, but not from around here. His suit was cut too fine, his shoes too glossy for a local manager. He nodded at Richard with quiet recognition, then glanced quickly at Elena before whispering something to the staff. She couldn't hear what he said, but the associate next to him immediately stepped out of the room. Something had shifted. Richard placed a hand gently on Elena's shoulder. "I'll be right back," he said. Before she could respond, he stepped out and disappeared into the hallway. She sat still, unsure whether to wait or follow. From where she was, she could hear faint buzzes, phones vibrating, not ringing, followed by hurried footsteps and indistinct murmurs from behind the walls. Meanwhile, Richard walked steadily past the side corridor and approached a locked black door marked, "Authorized Personnel Only." He placed his right thumb on the scanner beside the handle. The screen flashed green and the door clicked open without resistance. Inside was nothing extravagant, just beige walls, a desk, a few filing cabinets, the kind of room you'd forget if it didn't matter so much. A security guard sat at a small desk at the end of the hall. When he saw Richard, he stood up immediately, straightened his jacket, and nodded respectfully. "Afternoon, Mr. Langston." "Afternoon," Richard replied, not breaking stride. He turned left into the adjacent office, where a woman in her early 30s sat quietly, organizing a file of customer feedback forms. Her name badge was gone. Her uniform was missing the standard Russell emblem. She looked up when Richard entered, and her face shifted from surprise to relief. "Mr. Langston, I didn't think I'd see you here in person," she said. He sat across from her and offered a calm, steady nod. "I heard you were asked to leave 6 months ago," he said. "They said it was because you weren't the right fit for the brand image." She gave a soft laugh, dry and tired. "Yeah, that's the polite version," she said. "The truth is, I filed 2 reports, one about a manager faking customer satisfaction numbers, and another about profiling shoppers based on appearance. A week later, I was gone." Richard listened quietly, his hands folded on the table. "They've been letting it slide," she continued. "You'd think it was just 1 or 2 bad apples. But it's not. It's culture now. They're teaching new hires how to ignore people like your wife unless she walks in wearing pearls." He didn't react right away. He looked down at the table, then reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slim black card with a silver logo. He set it down gently in front of her. The name printed in small, clear letters read, "Richard Langston, Chief Executive Officer, Luxven Group." Her eyes widened. "You're the CEO?" she whispered. He nodded. "I've been doing site visits without notice. Quietly. No cameras. No red carpet. Just me and Elena. I didn't plan on using this stop for a full audit. But, here we are." Her voice was soft now. "Careful. Does she know?" "No," Richard said, "and I'd like to keep it that way, for now." Outside the office, Elena stood by the large window in the VIP room, watching the world go by. She could feel something shifting beneath the surface. The people, the energy, The silence that came not from peace but from control. Something told her this wasn't just about a dress anymore. Elena stood by the window, arms crossed loosely, watching the clouds drift past the rooftops across the street. Something in the air felt thinner now, lighter, but not calmer. She had always trusted Richard's instincts. But this time, she sensed there was something he wasn't telling her. He had that familiar quietness about him again, the kind that meant he was working through more than he let on. With a gentle step, she slipped out of the VIP lounge and made her way back down the polished staircase, heels brushing softly against each step. No one stopped her, though a few eyes tracked her movement. As she reached the main floor again, she caught snippets of a conversation drifting from behind one of the tall marble columns. CEO? Dressed like that? One voice whispered. He probably just made that up. Looks like someone's dad coming in for a refund. Another snickered faintly. Maybe they're trying to test our patience. Rich people can be weird. Elena didn't flinch. She just kept walking, head held steady, but the skin behind her ears prickled. She stepped through a side door marked terrace and found herself on a small stone balcony that overlooked the rear garden. The afternoon air was cooler out here, brushed with the scent of blooming jasmine and exhaust from the nearby street. She took out her phone, thumb hesitating for just a second before she tapped on the contact labeled Clara Saunders. It had been nearly 2 years since they last spoke, since Clara had left Russell under a wave of rumors and hush-hush HR meetings. The line rang once, twice, and then a voice picked up, quick, cautious, but unmistakable. Elena? Clara's voice cracked through the static. I didn't expect to hear from you. I didn't expect to call. Elena replied, but I'm standing in Russell right now. And I think you know why. A pause followed. Then Clara exhaled. What happened? I've seen enough to know something's wrong. Elena said, but I don't know the half of it. Clara's voice steadied. It's been happening for months. Maybe longer. They've been falsifying feedback reports, editing complaints before they reach corporate, even reshuffling appointment logs to make the store look busier. And the customers? Elena asked. They rank them, Clara said flatly, based on their clothes, bags, shoes, credit cards if they can sneak a look. It's called the shadow file. If you don't make the right impression, they pretend you're not even there. Elena gripped the edge of the railing, the iron warm under her palm. She had suspected favoritism, but this was different. This was deliberate. Back inside, Richard stood alone in a small security room tucked behind the employee hallway. His reflection in the monitor glass caught the light from a single overhead bulb. With slow fingers, he scrolled through digital logs, timestamps, camera angles, motion triggers. Each clip told a quiet story, customers overlooked, ignored, waved off with stiff smiles. He found patterns, names repeated in incident logs, customer satisfaction ratings altered within hours, video records trimmed before being stored. A folder marked flagged incidents contained internal warnings that had never reached him. He clicked through them one by one. Each carried a note, addressed internally. No further action required. But it wasn't addressed. It had been buried. He picked up the secure line and dialed the private board number. This is Richard Langston, he said, keeping his voice calm. I want to authorize an emergency audit for Russell location. Use discretion. Delay my identification for 24 hours. I want an honest response, not a performance. The board member on the other end acknowledged with a quiet, understood. Across the terrace, Elena's phone buzzed again, this time a text from Clara. Attached was an audio file. Elena hesitated for a beat before pressing play. The voice was unmistakable. It was the young manager from earlier, speaking in what he must have thought was a private moment, his tone dripping with arrogance. Even if the CEO walked in here without a Rolex or a Benz out front. He laughed. I'd make him wait outside like everybody else. Elena listened in silence. When the clip ended, she didn't move for a moment. She just stood there, phone at her side, looking out at the street below. The world still moved, horns honked, trees swayed. A man across the street walked his dog like nothing had changed. But for Elena, something had. She turned, slipped the phone back into her purse, and walked inside with a different kind of stillness in her step. She wasn't angry, not in the way people yelled or slammed doors. She was something quieter, More certain. The sun was just high enough to cast sharp shadows when the black van with gold lettering pulled up in front of Russell's entrance. Silver balloons shaped like the letter R fluttered in the breeze, and a red carpet stretched neatly from the front door to the sidewalk. Guarded on either end by velvet ropes, staff in matching black blazers moved with rehearsed precision, offering welcome drinks to invited guests, guiding reporters to their spots, and whispering updates into hidden earpieces. It was the store's biggest event of the quarter, Russell's VIP Client Appreciation Day. The name alone promised polish, and the crowd that gathered didn't disappoint. Sleek cars lined the curb. Photographers with long lenses captured every smile and handshake. PR reps buzzed around in fitted suits, making sure the lighting was right, the backdrop wrinkle-free, and the brand messaging seamless. Inside, Amanda Collins stood behind a podium trimmed in gold trim. Her dress was a rich emerald green that shimmered under the spotlights, and her earrings flashed with every turn of her head. She addressed the room with a voice as smooth as glass, her posture confident, rehearsed. At Russell, she said, pausing for effect, we put the client experience at the heart of everything we do. We don't just serve fashion. We serve dignity, elegance, and care. Cameras clicked. The crowd clapped politely. A few raised their champagne flutes. In the back of the room, Elena and Richard had entered quietly, unnoticed. Elena wore a soft blue blouse and slacks, her hair pinned neatly. Richard, in a gray cardigan and khaki pants, kept his hands in his pockets. There were no designer logos, no polished watches or Italian leather shoes. Amanda didn't glance their way. Her attention stayed fixed on the cluster of guests dressed like walking advertisements for luxury. She gestured subtly to her assistant, who nodded and redirected staff toward a group of investors arriving near the side display. Elena made her way toward the information booth, where a young man with a gold name tag was adjusting a stack of glossy brochures. "Hi," she said gently, "I have a question about your client complaint process." The young man barely looked up. "Ma'am, we're not handling complaints today," he said. "This is a special event for our preferred clients." "I understand," she replied, calm but steady, "but it seems like this would be the perfect day to talk about how the store treats people." He blinked, then forced a smile. "Again, today's not the day. If you'd like, I can give you a customer service number to call next week." Elena didn't argue. She simply stepped back, letting his words hang in the air between them. From across the room, Richard watched. A man approached him discreetly from the side, a Luxven corporate assistant in a navy blazer and silver tie. Without a word, the man passed Richard a slim folder, then melted back into the crowd. Richard opened it slowly. Inside were screenshots, staff rosters, data graphs, and internal memos. The documents confirmed everything Clara had warned them about. Client scores based on appearance, real-time customer flagging, a pattern of denied service to individuals outside visual priority groups. Most damning of all was a memo signed by Amanda herself, encouraging staff to focus energy on profiles likely to generate return sales. He slipped the folder under his arm and glanced up toward the front. Amanda was finishing her final remarks, thanking Luxven executives and local media for supporting their ongoing growth. Just then, a woman from the board of Luxven stepped onto the stage. She wore a navy pantsuit and no smile. She walked directly toward Amanda and whispered something only the nearest microphones could barely pick up. Amanda turned, blinking. "I'm sorry?" she asked, her voice catching. The board member leaned closer, then stepped up to the podium, lifting the mic with measured calm. "On behalf of the executive board at Luxven," she said, "a compliance review of this location will begin immediately. This decision has come at the direct request of our group CEO, Richard Langston." A hush fell over the room. Cameras stopped clicking. Glasses paused midair. Amanda's face turned pale under the bright lights. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her hands, once poised, fidgeted by her side. Elena looked up at the woman on stage, then at Richard. He hadn't moved. His expression remained unreadable. Amanda tried to recover. "There must be some mistake," she stammered. "We're in the middle of..." The board member continued without glancing at her. "We expect full transparency and cooperation from the management team, effective immediately." Richard met Amanda's eyes from across the room, offering nothing but silence. Elena stepped beside him, her voice soft but clear. I guess today is the perfect day after all. Amanda stood in the center of the showroom, her polished heels no longer grounding her the way they had earlier that morning. Her voice, once smooth and commanding, trembled slightly as she faced the gathered staff. Cameras now absent but whispers thick in the air. I had no knowledge of a client ranking system, she insisted. That must have been implemented without my approval. Across the room, the regional compliance officer said nothing, simply handed her a printed document. Amanda took it with a shaky hand. Her eyes scanned quickly, hoping for a loophole. There was none. Her own initials were at the bottom, next to the line that read, Customer Experience Evaluation Protocol, authorized by Amanda Collins. The date wasn't old, 3 months ago. Above it was the policy's first clause, prioritize clients based on spending potential and public image. She felt the weight of every eye in the room press against her like heat. Meanwhile, Richard remained out of sight, directing everything from a quiet office in a building 2 blocks away. No cameras, no fanfare, just a laptop, a phone, and a trusted advisor by his side. Send the audit teams to Boston and Chicago next, he said, eyes on a digital map where red dots marked risk-level stores. Then San Diego. Let's see if the pattern holds. The legal counsel next to him nodded, already typing instructions to the regional leads. At Russell, things were unraveling faster than Amanda could patch. Staff avoided her gaze. Upper management from Luxven walked the floors quietly, asking questions without raising voices, writing things down in neat little notebooks. Elena, standing near the cafe counter that had once refused her water, took a different approach. She wasn't part of any official team. No badge, no clipboard, but she had something else: time, patience, and truth. She sat beside a woman in her 60s, wearing a cardigan and sneakers, who admitted she'd been told her card might not work before even finishing her purchase. 2 others joined them soon after, a man in construction boots and a young woman in scrubs. All had their own stories. All had been made to feel small. I'm not trying to start trouble, one of them said. No, Elena replied. We're just finishing something that started without us. Later that day, a manila envelope arrived at Luxven's central inbox. It came from an address that wasn't registered in any employee database. But the contents were clear. Screenshots, raw data, client lists with checkboxes for attire, accessories, spending history. Next to each, serve, watch, or ignore. It was sent by Derek, a former sales associate who had quietly slipped out of Russell months earlier after failing to meet image alignment standards. He included a note. This was erased from the system. But not from me. I'm done watching this happen. But Derek didn't just send it to the corporation. He also sent it to a reporter at a consumer watchdog blog. The kind that had a loyal, vocal following. The kind that didn't wait for a press release. That night, the video leaked. It was grainy at first, pulled from a store camera 2 weeks prior. Amanda's voice was unmistakable. She was in the staff briefing room, standing before a whiteboard, pointing at a list with a marker in her hand. If the customer's not carrying a brand bag or driving something clean, she said, just let them browse. We don't need to waste energy. Someone laughed in the background. She laughed, too. By midnight, the clip had been reshared over 50,000 times. By morning, it was on every major consumer forum, discussed in podcast episodes, posted on fashion blogs with headlines like, The Price of Being Ignored. Elena watched it from her kitchen table with a mug of chamomile tea. The video didn't surprise her, but the comments underneath did. Strangers from across the country shared their own stories. Men and women from all walks of life describing moments they were dismissed, judged, or treated like an inconvenience. Some were angry, others hurt. Many just said, I thought it was just me. At the bottom of one thread, a quiet comment stood out. I was there that day. The woman they ignored? She's the reason the truth's coming out. Elena closed the browser slowly. Outside her window, the street was quiet again. But she knew, somewhere in the heart of the city, glass was starting to splinter. Elena woke before the sun did. The glow from her phone, face down on the nightstand, Had been blinking all night. She hadn't touched it since midnight. But now, curiosity crept in like cold morning air through a cracked window. She flipped it over. 37 missed calls. Over 100 messages. Most from numbers she didn't recognize. But a few from friends and old acquaintances who hadn't reached out in years. Just saw the video. That was you, right? Would you be willing to talk to our news team? I always knew something was off about those places. She scrolled, pausing at a message from her niece. Proud of you. Auntie, you stood your ground. Elena exhaled slowly. Outside the window, the neighborhood was still quiet. The coffee shop across the street hadn't even opened yet. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like a calm before something she couldn't name. By noon, the story had spread beyond fashion blogs and into national media. Headlines ranged from Russell scandal exposes ugly side of luxury to anonymous CEO orders internal purge. She declined every interview request. It wasn't her story to control. And she didn't want the spotlight. Not like this. At the same hour, Richard sat at the head of a long conference table inside the Luxven headquarters. The blinds were shut, phones silenced. Only the ticking of the wall clock could be heard between conversations. Across from him sat the heads of internal audit, legal, ethics, and our. All had seen the footage. All understood the storm they were standing in. Richard folded his hands together. This isn't just about Russell, he said calmly. It's about every link in the chain that let this happen. He slid a folder to the center of the table. Effective today, we begin a systemic review of all domestic locations, client logs, employee turnover patterns, complaint history, everything. Nobody argued. They only nodded. I want every regional manager suspended during the process. Richard continued. No communication with store staff unless cleared by compliance. Then he looked to the corner of the room, where a woman had just walked in, gray streaks in her dark hair. Sharp eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses. She wore no badge, didn't need one. This is Louise Kaplan, Richard said. She'll be leading the ethics redesign initiative. Some eyebrows lifted. Louise had once been the national director of customer service, known for her no-nonsense approach and genuine care for frontline employees. But she'd been forced out 2 years ago after refusing to endorse a pilot project that, at the time, had been dismissed as hypothetical. Now she pulled a slim laptop from her bag and opened a file marked Tiering Protocols, Legacy Testing. The classification system, she said, originated from a project initiated 3 years ago in the Pacific Northwest region. It was meant to optimize service flow, but in reality, it ranked customers by their appearance and presumed net worth. She paused. The approval for the pilot came from then Vice Regional Director Stephen Valmont. The name settled into the air like smoke. Several faces turned toward Richard, gauging his reaction. He didn't blink. Louise clicked to the next slide. Memos, signatures, a chain of decisions that led directly to current practices. Valmont's name appeared again and again, not just as a participant, but as the architect. And he's still with us? Someone finally asked. He is, Richard replied, and as of this morning, he's lobbying for my removal from the board, citing concerns over my health and judgment. No one spoke, but a shift moved through the room like wind under a door. Richard leaned back slightly. This isn't just about discrimination in service. It's about a rot in the culture. And it ends now. Louise closed her laptop, her expression unreadable. I've waited 3 years to hear those words, she said quietly. That night, Richard returned home later than usual. Elena sat on the couch, reading messages on a tablet but barely reacting to any of them. He poured them both tea and sat beside her. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, she asked, is this just the beginning? He nodded once. It always was. The boardroom at Luxven's Manhattan headquarters wasn't often used. It was more of a formality, a remnant from when decisions were made around tables instead of through digital dashboards. But today, the room buzzed with urgency, the kind that brought seasoned executives out from behind closed doors and into the same space for the first time in years. Elena had never been inside this room before. She sat quietly in the back, where spouses and aides were allowed, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes moved from one sharply dressed board member to the next, most of whom hadn't even glanced in her direction. She wasn't here to be seen anyway. She was here to see. At the long oak table, Richard sat near the center. His tie was looser than usual, but his presence filled the room more than any polished attire ever could. He said nothing yet, just let the tension simmer. The seats around the table filled one by one. Legal, finance, strategy, PR. No one looked particularly comfortable. Then Stephen Valmont entered. Tall, composed, dressed in a navy suit that practically shimmered under the overhead lights. He moved with the ease of a man used to commanding attention. And for a moment, he had it. A few board members stood. Out of habit or loyalty. He nodded in return, then moved straight to the head of the table where the presentation monitor awaited. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, thank you for convening on such short notice. He clicked a remote. A series of slides appeared, graphs, timelines, and bullet points that looked clean and well practiced. His voice was smooth as he painted the narrative. The incident at Russell, while unfortunate, stems from mismanagement at the store level. Amanda Collins and her team failed to uphold our values. What we need now is swift internal resolution and a focused PR strategy to restore confidence in our brand. There was a murmur of agreement from one end of the table. Elena noticed how some board members nodded without really thinking. Then Richard stood. He didn't need a screen. He didn't even need notes. What we need, he said slowly, is to stop pretending this is a one-store issue. This isn't about PR. It's about trust. It's about whether we're the kind of company that serves people or filters them. Stephen offered a tight smile. With all due respect, Richard, I've outlined a plan. I've seen your plan. Richard cut in, pulling a small device from his jacket. He pressed play. The room fell silent as Stephen's voice filled the space, recorded. Clipped from a meeting a year ago. If we can get this filtering model standardized, we'll stop wasting time on customers who won't spend. It's like natural selection. Let them walk. Silence clung to the room like fog. Stephen's face stiffened, but he said nothing. Richard let the moment settle, then turned to Louise, who stepped forward from the corner and placed a binder on the table. This is the full breakdown, Richard said. Every pilot test, every approval, every expense tied to this program, including Stephen's signature on the initial budget allocation. Stephen leaned forward, voice clipped now. That document was taken out of context. You're making assumptions. Before Richard could respond, a voice from the far end of the table broke the tension. It was Margaret Chen, board member. Usually silent, known for her analytical reports but never for speaking publicly during conflict. I don't think we're assuming anything, she said calmly, because I found this. She held up a folder and walked to the center of the room, placing it beside Louisa's binder. It was buried in the 2022 storage drive, mislabeled under Logistics, internal project titled Client Classification Flow. Budget approved by Stephen Valmont. Not only that, he marked it as non-auditable and excluded it from regular oversight. She opened to a page marked with Stephen's digital signature. At the bottom of the memo, a short note in bold. Do not disclose to compliance or our. Discuss only via secure line. Gasps moved across the table like falling dominoes. Stephen's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, the confidence slipped from his eyes. Elena sat still, her pulse steady now. She glanced at Richard, whose expression hadn't changed, but something behind his eyes had softened. Margaret returned to her seat. We can't claim ignorance anymore, she said, not as a board, not as a brand. The room shifted. One by one, heads turned toward Richard. He didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. We either lead with honesty, he said, or we get left behind in our own lies. Stephen's face didn't flush red or twist in outrage like one might expect. Instead, it went pale, the kind of pale that crept up slow, like winter seeping through an old window frame. His mouth pressed into a thin line, eyes scanning the room not with panic, but calculation. Then he adjusted his cuffs and leaned forward, voice still even. These documents, he said, are either fabricated or deliberately altered to create a narrative. And that recording, there's no verification of its context or origin. He looked directly at Margaret Chen, who had presented the files. Then at Richard. This is character assassination. Plain and simple. The room stirred. Uneasiness replacing outrage. A few board members shifted in their seats. One cleared his throat. Another whispered to a neighbor. That's when Philip Danner, head of international operations and a longtime friend of Stephen, raised his hand. We're entering dangerous territory, Philip said. This company cannot afford a public fracture at the executive level. I propose a temporary suspension of Richard's authority, pending an independent review. The air grew thicker. Richard didn't flinch. He looked down at his watch, then back up with the calm of a man who'd walked through far worse. Margaret opened her mouth to object, but the murmurs had begun. A second voice joined in agreement. Then a third. Legal counsel looked uncertain but took notes quickly. It was Elena who stood next. No one expected her to speak, not here, not now, but she walked to the front of the room, past the marble table and polished shoes, and turned to face them with quiet resolve. I don't work here, she began, and I'm not a shareholder. But I've been inside one of your stores 2 days ago. Silence. I walked into Russell to buy a birthday gift. No one greeted me. One employee called me a browser. Another told me a certain dress wasn't within my price range. And when my husband, your CEO, stood beside me, dressed plainly like I was, he was treated like he didn't belong, like a driver waiting in the lobby. Her voice didn't rise. If anything, it softened. I never raised my voice. I didn't demand attention. I just watched. And when things shifted, when someone whispered that he might be someone important, everything changed. Smiles appeared. Apologies poured in, but it was too late. She paused, and her gaze swept across the boardroom. If a brand only values its customers based on how they dress, what they drive, or which card they carry, then it's not a brand worth saving. A deep stillness settled over the room. Even Stephen didn't interrupt. Richard met Elena's eyes briefly, just a flicker, and in that quiet glance, there was pride, sorrow, and something else too, resignation. I'll step aside, he said, turning back to the board. Temporarily. Appoint someone neutral. I want full transparency. And when the time comes, I'll speak publicly to every shareholder across the country. He reached for his briefcase and stood. There was no drama in the motion, just decision. Outside the boardroom, the afternoon sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting long gold streaks across the glass walls. Elena waited for Richard just beyond the threshold. He took her hand wordlessly. But before they could leave, Louise came around the corner, breath short, a tablet in her hand. I just got this, she said quietly. Anonymous sender, internal Luxven address. She passed the screen to Richard. He scanned the message, lips tightening as he read. It was a list, store locations, employee IDs, system flags, and all tied to the same customer profiling model they thought was isolated to Russell. Nearly a dozen more stores, all across the country, and at the top of the sender's note, one new name. Evelyn Shaw. Richard looked up sharply. She's been silent this whole time, he muttered. Never showed her hand once. Louise nodded. Stephen might not have been the one holding the strings after all. The lights in the hall were dimmed just enough to draw attention to the stage, but not so much that you couldn't see the faces in the crowd. It was a different kind of spotlight now, less about performance, more about reckoning. Elena sat near the front row, hands folded over Richard's as they waited. The air was quiet, but not still. It pulsed with tension, with anticipation. Across the country, screens flickered on, laptops in boardrooms, televisions in living rooms, phones clutched by curious customers. Everyone wanted to see what would happen next at Luxven. When Richard stepped up to the podium, he wasn't dressed like a CEO about to defend himself. No sharp power suit, no designer shoes, just a plain gray blazer, open collar, a man standing not above the people, but with them. He began simply. Over the past month, he said, we have uncovered a deeply rooted failure, not just in one store, not just in one manager, but in the culture we let grow silently beneath the surface. He paused to let that sink in. Then he reached for the tablet beside him, tapping to reveal a series of slides on the large screen behind. Here is the structure, he continued, of the internal customer profiling system known as Tier Map. It began as a pilot, then expanded, without oversight, without consent, and without accountability. The room sat motionless. He moved through documents, real ones, memos, flagged budgets, internal emails. Then came the audio files. Stephen's voice played aloud, saying words they couldn't unhear. If we don't filter the crowd, we drown in mediocrity. Richard turned back to the audience, eyes focused. This wasn't a rogue decision. It was embedded, approved, protected. But today, we draw a line. There was a murmur, barely audible, as the board members leaned into their own thoughts. Stephen was not in the room. He had been officially suspended 3 days earlier, pending a formal investigation. The headlines already circled his name. But Richard didn't stop there. He looked down, took a breath, and said, "There's one more name I won't share today. Not because I want to protect them, but because I believe in due process. Because the system we're fixing doesn't need another rush to judgment. It needs clarity and accountability." Elena's eyes met his. There was something in his tone she hadn't heard before. Not fear, not anger, resolve. The chairwoman of the board rose after Richard stepped back. She didn't hesitate. In light of the evidence and the transparency displayed, she said, "We request Richard Madsen to remain in his position as CEO, with oversight by an external ethics panel and full authority to restructure LuxVen's operational code." Applause started small, then grew, not loud, but steady, the kind that came not from excitement, but from relief. From people who had been waiting for someone to say what needed to be said. Later that afternoon, in the hallway just off stage, Elena stood with a cup of tea in hand, watching the screen replay Richard's closing words. "If the people we ignore are the ones who teach us the most, then maybe it's time we start listening from the bottom up." A woman approached her, mid-30s. Sharp eyes, soft smile. She introduced herself as Camille Rhodes, the new director of customer experience. "I wanted to ask," Camille said, "if you would consider helping us shape the new guidelines. We're calling it the Fair Experience. Just as an honorary advisor." Elena blinked. "Me? You?" Camille said, nodding. "You saw it, lived it. That perspective matters." Elena smiled, slow and thoughtful. "I'll help," she said, "but only if we listen to people like Clara and that young woman at the counter. People who don't wear titles." Camille nodded again. Later that night, Richard sat in his home office, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up. The city lights beyond the window blinked like quiet signals. His inbox was full, most of it praise or concern or policy requests. But one message caught his eye. No subject, no sender, just a single line of text. "You've only scratched the surface. This didn't start at Russell. It started at LuxVen Labs." He read it twice, then again. He leaned back in his chair, let out a slow breath, and turned his gaze to the window. The reflection staring back at him wasn't just a man who'd weathered a storm. It was someone realizing the storm had only just begun. Behind him, Elena stepped into the room. He didn't look at her, just spoke softly. "It's deeper than we thought." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we keep going." He nodded once, not with certainty, but with clarity. Outside, the city didn't sleep, and neither did the truth. And maybe that's the real lesson here. Respect shouldn't come from a price tag or a business card. It should come from the way we treat people when we think they have nothing to offer us. What would you have done if you were in that store? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe to Undercover Truths for more powerful, real-life stories that reveal what happens when the quietest voices finally get heard.